Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Carpetras, and I'm here today with somebody who's pretty recognizable in the quilt world, LUKE Haynes. Hi, Luke.
Hi.
Welcome. Luke is, you're sort of a multi-hyphenate in some ways, but it really does distill down to quilter, wouldn't you say? As we just were discussing beforehand, we were trying to come up with a description for where you are these days in the quilt world and the art world, and so we're just going to leave it at quilter for now.
Sure.
But let's backtrack and let's start with, how you got started, a little bit about your background and quilting in your family.
Sure. Well, I mean, I got started kind of sideways. I was in art school. I was in a conservatory for art, doing painting and sculpture and drawing and design and color theory and all of these things. And I had a break from classes and had some fabric and decided I'd try my hand at quilting. And made a quilt. It took me a couple of years to make, of course. One's first
That's so
one.
good to hear.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. The first one was, quite a trauma. But at the end of it, I was really excited about what I had made. It was kind of ugly, but the object of it was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And you didn't really grow up. It's not like your mother quilted necessarily. You had some in your background, right?
Right. So it's sort of my great grandmother quilted, and my mom made me a blankie when I was little, and these kind of a thing. So there was sewing and quilting around, but not sort of actively in my home.
So you made that first quilt, and then you went to. Meantime, you went to college.
Right. I went to architecture school.
Architecture.
Yeah.
And what kind of buildings did you think you were going to be doing? Did you have an idea?
I'm really excited about adaptive reuse. So taking existing structures and then turning them into functional environments. The warehouses into apartments, or old banks into restaurants, or any number of things like that. Sort of existing into the new, which is actually how I do my quilts too. I was just
thinking that really feeds into the quilts that you do. And then what represented the? Was there a turning point that you really sort of focused on quilts, where you left architecture, building buildings, and turned it to? I think the word you used was like quilt architect or something.
Yeah. I mean,
you see a real connection there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap in quilting and architecture, especially the way that I do it. I mean, I definitely take used clothes and obviously a lot of other fabrics and material as well, deconstruct those, and then reconstruct them into a quilt. But there was a distinct line where I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do this full time. And it was definitely, that choice for sure.
And how did you arrive at your signature style now? The quilt that's behind me is one that I think of as sort of being your signature style. So you have this traditional looking piece background with a very contemporary looking portrait appliqué on top. Is that fair to say?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, I don't know if signature style or whatever, it's what I'm working on for sure. But I think it's me learning. So I'm really interested in learning. And so the figure on top is kind of my way of interpreting how to make a figure with fabric. And then the traditional background is what I'm learning about from the history of quilting and a lot of these methods that I've picked up over the years, trying to kind of learn how to sew better and quilt better and learn from the histories of quilting. Because I came at it from a designer side where I thought, how can I make a picture out of fabric? And I did that. And then all of a sudden I learned there's all this quilt history and quilt technique and quilt lore and quilt community, and I found that so interesting. So I'm incorporating that as kind of the foundation for each of my pieces now. So I'm trying to kind of interpret what quilting means to the objects that I construct.
And is that a look that kind of emerged full form? Is it something you evolved to? I mean, when you made that decision?
Oh, it definitely evolved. I mean, the first 30 quilts or so didn't have a single thing of quilting in it.
Okay.
Piecing, I guess I should say, because they're all quilts. They had the 3 layers, the front, the batting, and the back were sewn through, but I didn't do any piecing work in terms of traditional patterns at all for probably the first 30 or so. So really learning about that. Later on.
Okay. And, I said, people should recognize who you are. And the reason for that is you're really kind of making a crossover into, I would say, mainstream or non-quilt journalism or press coverage. I've had friends post stories on my Facebook timeline or email me stories saying, hey, have you heard about this guy? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And we actually interviewed you, Quilters Newsletter interviewed you about, I don't know what, 5 years ago or so?
Oh gosh, I don't
somewhere
remember.
in there.
Yeah.
It was before I started, so when I would get these stories from my friends, I'd be like, yeah, well, we have already interviewed him, so I can't interview him for this thing. But you're getting, like LA Weekly, which is a free weekly publication in Los Angeles, covered you. And
I was in the New York Times. I mean, there's a lot of...
little rag called the New York Times, for instance. And you're really making a name for yourself in the art world. So let's talk about that.
Right. Well, I mean, the real thing is it's not so much I'm crossing over from the quilt world into the art world. It's way the other way. I'm coming in the art and design world and making some headway into the quilt world, which is what I'm learning about later. I mean, I come from a background of galleries and design and very kind of, you know, just wall art, you know, wall objects, you know, this kind of idea of, you know, high art from a word perspective, and then kind of, you know, expanding into quilts and a lot more, you know, like tactile art and things.
And none of this is an accident. I mean, I think it's important to talk about that this is not like, you're just not, you know, like, oh, my little quilts. I mean, you have products of value. Yeah. And you are putting yourself out there. As you said, you've hunted down opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. Talk about that mindset maybe, you know, for people out there who maybe want to present themselves as artists who make quilts. Right, right. How did that start, or, you know, how do you get started? Sure. Well, I mean, the unfortunate part is that the beginning is the hardest, right? I mean, your first show is the hardest to figure out and find the space for, and, you know, talk to people and feel the, you know, the readiness to let it go out of your studio and things. But, you know, just really, for me, just doing it and continuing to talk to everyone and show my work as much as I can, and really do a lot of outreach. I do Marketing Monday, so every Monday I, you know, get my email to 0. I do social media, but I also do some outreach to galleries or museums or somebody who I really want to know about my work, in the anticipation that not necessarily that connection, but, you know, 3 degrees later, either that person or somebody that they know will be interested in my work. For instance, the American Folk Art Museum. Right. You were one of 3 artists exhibited, and that was in 2013, I believe, right? Yeah. Okay. And I asked you how you got that, and your response was? Right, well, I have a friend who works for the museum, you know, who got me connected with the main curator, and then I harassed him for years, you know, just emails. And, you know, whenever I showed up, I'd stop in and say hello, you know, and then we eventually got to a place where they said, oh, you know, we were thinking about doing a show, and, well, we remember you. Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think that's really important. And to not be coy about it, or disingenuous about, oh, just little old me. I mean, that you are working with an agent now. Right, right. And you've got this Fossil campaign. Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah, that's really great. So Fossil, the company that does watches and clothes, have asked me to make the centerpiece for their 30th year anniversary. So they've hired me to make this 10-foot by 12-foot quilt that's going to hang for their launch of that year and that kind of big event, and they're going to go back to their headquarters. But then also they're going to be taking some of your work and putting them on watch bands. Right, right. And you've also appeared in print ads. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot going on in your face. Well, let's talk about your face. Right. Your face appears on your quilts a lot. Let's go back to, again, the look of the quilt that's hanging behind me. You do self-portraits quite often, which is a very well-respected tradition in the art world. Right. Was there any, like, specific thought behind that? Sure. Well, there's 2 thoughts now. The first thoughts were, as I was learning the medium, I was too shy to ask anybody to sit for a portrait. I didn't want to do anything but what I could contain in my studio, and I happened to be there. So, you know, kind of pulling from the art history trope of, while I practice, I'll use myself. You know, a lot of painters and drawers and illustrators used images of themselves as they were trying new techniques, new medium, etc. So I did the same thing, but it has grown into a lot more. It's a lot about branding now. There's a lot of myself that goes into my work in terms of the branding of it, in terms of this idea of the overarching parts of my career and sort of the visuals that I present. And you bring in your friends now. Right, yeah. And you said you asked your friend, Chad, to sit for you. And he's absolutely not sitting. No, yeah. Well, so, I mean, I wanted him to
be able to do what he wanted. But the goal for this was to create a portrait that was really dynamic in a quilt. I mean, why is it a quilt portrait versus a printed image? And the answer to that is because it's made from his own clothes. And so it's the textiles and the textures and the colors that he used to present himself. So I told him, I said, bring a handheld object of importance and a change of clothes, because you're going to leave me what you're wearing. Okay. And I gave him a chair to sit with if he wanted to, and obviously he didn't choose to.
Yeah. Do the backgrounds that you put the portraits on have any correlation with the subject of the portrait?
Well, I mean, the background of this one is all used clothes from Seattle. So it's the community in which that person lives. So it's this kind of dialogue from private to public and kind of, individual to community. So for sure, it's also the same kind of a thing. But the color of it, for the whole exhibition, there's only 3 background colors. They're red, white, and black. And I choose the one that makes the figure pop the most.
Okay. And this is an ongoing series that you're working in. Yeah. And that's just one of the series that you've got going on at any given time?
Yeah, there's always quite a lot.
About how many quilts are you able to finish a year?
It ranges. Last year was a really small year. I think I made probably 6. The year before that was probably about 30.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a big range of quilt numbers per year. This next year, this year I've already made probably 8 or 10.
Okay, and this is, at the time that we're taping this, it's early 2014, so you've been pretty prolific.
I've been really prolific
the last
this year.
Few months.
Yeah.
And for good reason, because you've got a lot going on.
Right.
How many shows do you have in 2014 that you know of?
Well, I've already had about 7 shows so far. Again, we're still early in the year. I'll probably end up with around 15 to 18 shows this year.
And these are mostly in the U.S. and Canada, or?
All over, internationally as well. Mostly in the U.S. and Canada, but definitely starting to branch into some Europe and things.
Is this something, again, you said, exposure begets exposure.
Right.
Or opportunities beget opportunities. So, for instance, how do you get to show internationally? Is it something that they've approached you? Is your agent putting you out there? Are you putting yourself out there?
I'm putting myself out there a lot. Right now I'm trying to vet some venues to produce a show of my own work over in London so that I can try to meet the London art community. So that will be a really good way to do it.
Okay.
So actually rent a venue, put my work up, that kind of a thing, and then bring people to the work versus the other way around.
Okay. Well, we'll just stay tuned, because it sounds like you're really set to really explode in some ways.
Yeah, so many things are going great,
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today.
Certainly.
It was really interesting. We could do this, as I said, I feel like we should put you on Charlie Rose or something and give you a full hour. So we'd love to have you back sometime if ever the opportunity presents itself.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.